is Dean and Travel. Dean Jacobs coming to you from Ethiopia, Africa. On a journey through Egypt back in 2002, I sailed on the Nile River for 5 days, a location almost 4,000 miles from where I now find myself. And ever since that time, I have been intrigued with the Nile and where it starts its mystical journey. Lake Tana, the source of the Blue Nile, was a mystery that taunted explorers for years. There are a few rivers that dump into and source Lake Tana, but the Blue Nile begins its long journey from the south end of the lake. As we moved across the lake, our boat motored past papyrus boats loaded with firewood to be sold at the local market in Bahadar. They were stacked so high that I whinged at the thought of trying to paddle across this huge lake with the hopes of making a few dollars. I asked, "What does a boat cost?" 250 birr, the guide said, who once himself paddled a wood boat. "Well, how long do they last?" I ask again. 2 weeks, he responds. After that, they're finished. After buying and making a boat and selling the wood, I calculate that they make about 400 birr a month, or around $50. Every time we passed a boat, they smiled and they waved. I conclude, a shared respect and love for the open space of the lake must transcend any language barriers. We made 3 stops on Lake Tana to visit monasteries that date back to the 14th century. Monks draped in yellow, orange, or burnt red garments, much like their predecessors some 400 years ago, showed us the ancient buildings and the artifacts, like this Bible that was hundreds of years old, or these ancient Ethiopian crosses. The colorful paintings inside the churches told biblical stories and local legends. The monasteries are active, and it was not unusual to see people who had made a pilgrimage to pray at a church. When not showing tourists the ancient churches, many of the monks spend their time reading the Bible or doing the daily chores like washing clothes in the lake. The last stop on our morning tour, the location where the Blue Nile begins its long journey through Africa and eventually ends up spilling into the salt waters of the Mediterranean Sea. It's a very unassuming spot as I glance over to a boy paddling in the water with a papyrus kayak, but when I take a closer look over to the bank and I study it for just a moment, I notice the ripple of current waters spilling over rocks adjacent to the shore. And in that moment, my heart jumps quietly. Wow, I say to myself, there it is, the subtle start of a majestic journey rich in history. I reach down to touch the greenish-gray water to feel the wetness, as if confirming to myself that it's real and not a dream. And I think to myself, if only waters could tell stories. Not far from Lake Tana, the water crashes down 90 feet over the Blue Nile Falls, once so spectacular that it adorns the back of the Ethiopian one-birr note. The waterfall has been reduced to a trickle of its once former self, though. 95% of the water is now diverted to a hydroelectric plant. As I walked to the falls, I was accompanied by a couple of young children, Munagitu and Wooly, who were more than happy to serve as my self-appointed tour guides. I also shared the view of the falls with this small herd of goats. Munagitu was a talented young man who was very happy to share his musical gift with me. It was with a mixture of awe and sadness that I sat watching the falls from the viewpoint. You can clearly see what once was, and you're left hungry for a moment of the legend of Tissa Bay or the smoke of the Nile. I walked completely around the falls before heading back home to Bahadar, the city that sits on the shores of the lake, and I found a quiet space that night to watch the sun set over the mystical lake Tana. Coming next, my fascination with Lake Tana prompts me to take a 2-day journey across the ancient lake. This is Dean Jacobs, reminding you to check your compass, because you never know where you might go with the Dean of Travel.